The magistrate's proclamation arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Julian Yates read it 3 times before the words stopped feeling like a practical joke. Every unmarried man between the ages of 18 and 40 was required by law to wed an Orc woman within 30 days, part of the treaty that had ended the border wars. Refusal meant exile or imprisonment. Julian set the parchment down on his kitchen table and stared at the cracked wood grain, trying to imagine what his life would become. He was 26, a carpenter by trade, and he had never expected to marry at all. The war had taken his father and older brother, leaving him to care for his mother until her death 2 winters past. Since then, he had lived alone in the small cottage at the edge of Millbrook, a farming village so unremarkable that most maps did not bother including it. He kept to himself, built furniture and repaired roofs, and tried not to think too much about the future. Now the future had arrived in the form of a legal mandate, and he had no choice but to face it. The assignment came a week later. Julian joined the other unmarried men in the village square, where a royal officer read names from a scroll. When Julian heard his own name paired with someone called Kessa, he felt his stomach drop. The officer provided an address, a settlement house on the far side of the village where the Orc women were being housed temporarily. Julian was to meet his assigned bride that afternoon. He walked there in a daze, his boots crunching on the gravel road. Other men passed him going the opposite direction, their faces pale and stricken. One man was openly weeping. Julian tried to steel himself for whatever awaited him. He had seen Orcs before, of course. During the war, they had been fearsome opponents, tall and powerful, with green skin like moss and tusks that gleamed when they roared. He remembered the way they moved, all coiled strength and deadly grace. He remembered how easily they could snap a man's neck. The settlement house was a converted barn, drafty and dim. A human clerk sat at a desk near the entrance, looking deeply exhausted. Julian gave his name and was directed to a corner where a small figure sat on a wooden bench, hunched over with her hands folded in her lap. Julian approached slowly, his heart hammering. As he drew closer, he realized with a jolt that this Orc was nothing like the warriors he had seen during the war. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, perhaps an inch or 2 more, with narrow shoulders and slim arms. Her skin was the pale green of new leaves, and her tusks were so small they barely protruded past her lower lip. She wore a simple gray dress that looked too large for her frame, and her dark hair was pulled back in a braid that fell to her mid-back. When she looked up at him, her eyes were wide and golden, filled with something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "You are Julian?" she asked, and her voice was soft, almost tentative. "Yes," he managed. "You are Kessa," she nodded, standing up quickly. The top of her head barely reached his shoulder. "I am Kessa. I am to be your wife." The words sounded strange coming from her, as though she were reciting lines from a script she did not fully understand. Julian swallowed hard and tried to think of something appropriate to say. "We should talk," he said finally. "Would you like to come to my home? It is not far." Kessa picked up a small cloth bundle that contained, he assumed, all her possessions. "I will come," she said. They walked in silence through the village. Julian was acutely aware of the stares they received, the way people stopped their conversations to watch them pass. He kept his eyes forward and tried to ignore the whispers. Beside him, Kessa walked with her head down, her arms wrapped around her bundle. When they reached his cottage, Julian opened the door and gestured for her to enter. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes darting around the single-room space. There was a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a bed in one corner, and a workbench cluttered with tools and wood shavings. It was not much, but it was clean and sturdy. You may put your things anywhere, Julian said, suddenly feeling awkward. I will sleep on the floor, you can have the bed. Kessa turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her face. You do not have to do that. I insist, Julian said firmly. I know this situation is not of your choosing any more than it is of mine. I will not make it worse by being ungentlemanly. For a long moment, Kessa simply stared at him. Then, slowly, she set her bundle down on the bed. Thank you, she said quietly. They stood there in uncomfortable silence until Julian cleared his throat. Are you hungry? I have bread and cheese, some apples. I am hungry, Kessa admitted. Julian set about preparing a simple meal, slicing bread and cheese on the cutting board while Kessa sat at the table. He poured water into 2 cups and brought everything over. They ate without speaking, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of the cottage settling. Finally, Kessa spoke. Why are you being kind to me? Julian looked up, surprised by the directness of the question. Why would I not be? Because I am an orc, Kessa said simply. Because your people hate mine. Because this law forces you to marry someone you do not want. Julian set down his bread. That is all true, he said carefully, but none of it is your fault. You did not ask for this any more than I did, and I will not punish you for circumstances beyond either of our control. Kessa's golden eyes searched his face, as though trying to determine if he was being truthful. You are different from what I expected, she said at last. What did you expect? Anger, cruelty. I thought you would hate me on sight. She looked down at her hands. Many of the other men made that clear when they saw their assigned brides. Julian felt a pang of guilt, even though he had done nothing wrong himself. I am sorry, he said. You deserve better than that. Kessa's expression softened, just a fraction. So do you. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence. Afterward, Julian showed Kessa around the cottage, explaining where things were kept and how the fireplace worked. She listened attentively, asking occasional questions in that same soft voice. As the evening wore on, Julian found himself relaxing slightly. Kessa was nothing like the terrifying orc warriors from the war. She was quiet and careful, moving through the space as though afraid to take up too much room. When darkness fell, Julian made up a pallet on the floor near the fireplace, using blankets and an old pillow. Kessa watched him, her expression troubled. I still do not think this is right, she said. This is your home, you should not sleep on the floor. I have slept in far worse places, Julian said lightly. During the war, I would have been grateful for a wooden floor and a roof. You fought in the war, Kessa's voice was carefully neutral. I did, for 2 years. Julian sat down on his makeshift bed and looked up at her. I am guessing you did too in some capacity. No, Kessa said, surprising him. I was too small. My clan said I was not built for fighting. They kept me in the rear camps doing menial work, cooking, mending, hauling supplies. Julian tried to imagine this small, quiet person in a war camp filled with fierce orc warriors. That must have been difficult, he said. It was better than dying. Kessa moved toward the bed, then paused. Julian, I need to tell you something. He waited, sensing this was important. I am not strong like other orcs, Kessa said, the words coming out in a rush. I am not a warrior. I cannot fight or hunt or do heavy labor. I am weak by orc standards. That is why they sent me here for this treaty. I am considered useless to my clan. She took a shaky breath. I do not know what use I can be to you either, but I will try. I will work hard. I will not be a burden. The desperation in her voice made Julian's chest tighten. He stood up and crossed the room to stand before her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Kessa, listen to me. You do not have to prove anything. You do not have to earn your place here. This is your home now, and I will not treat you as a servant or a burden. Kessa's eyes were bright, suspiciously shiny. Why? She whispered. Why would you treat an orc with such kindness? Because you are not just an orc, Julian said gently. You are a person, and you deserve to be treated like one. A single tear escaped down Kessa's green cheek. She wiped it away quickly as though embarrassed. I do not understand you, human, she said, but there was no hostility in her words, only confusion. Julian, he corrected with a small smile. My name is Julian, and I do not entirely understand this situation either, but we are in it together. We might as well make the best of it. Kessa nodded slowly, then retreated to the bed. She lay down fully clothed on top of the blankets, curled on her side facing the wall. Julian returned to his pallet by the fire and pulled the blanket over himself. The floor was hard and uncomfortable, but he had meant what he said about sleeping in worse places. Good night, Kessa, he said into the darkness. There was a long pause, then a soft reply. Good night, Julian. Sleep was a long time coming for both of them. The next morning, Julian woke to the smell of cooking. He sat up, disoriented, to find Kessa crouched by the fireplace, stirring something in a pot. The early morning light filtered through the window, casting everything in shades of gray and gold. You did not have to do that, Julian said, rubbing his eyes. Kessa glanced back at him. I wanted to. You shared your food with me last night. It is only right that I help with the cooking. Julian got to his feet and stretched, his back protesting the night on the floor. He joined Kessa by the fire and peered into the pot. She had made a simple porridge from the oats he kept in the pantry, adding some dried berries for sweetness. It smells good, he said honestly. A tiny smile crossed Kessa's face, the first he had seen from her. My mother taught me to cook. It was one of the few skills I had that my clan valued. They ate breakfast together at the table, and Julian found himself stealing glances at his unexpected bride. In the morning light, she looked even more delicate than she had yesterday. Her features were fine, almost elfin, and her movements were precise and controlled. She caught him looking and quickly lowered her gaze, a faint flush darkening her cheeks. I have work today, Julian said after they had finished eating. I am building a chest for the baker. You are welcome to stay here and rest, or to explore the village if you would like. May I come with you? Kessa asked hesitantly. I would like to see what you do. Julian was surprised but pleased. Of course, though I warn you, carpentry is not very exciting to watch. I do not mind. So Kessa accompanied him to his workshop, a small structure behind the cottage where he kept his tools and lumber. Julian pulled out the partially finished chest and showed her the design he was working from. Kessa listened attentively, asking intelligent questions about the joinery and the type of wood he was using. As Julian worked, Kessa sat on a stool in the corner, watching in silence. He found her presence oddly comforting. She did not chatter or distract him, but occasionally she would offer to hand him a tool or hold a piece of wood steady while he made a cut. Her hands were small but steady, and she followed his instructions precisely. By midday, Julian had made good progress on the chest. He sat back, wiping sawdust from his forehead, and realized he was hungry. Shall we go back for lunch? He asked. Kessa nodded and stood, brushing wood shavings from her skirt. As they walked back to the cottage, Julian noticed the way villagers stared at them. Some looks were curious, others hostile. He saw Mrs. Pemberton cross the street to avoid passing too close to Kessa. He felt a flash of anger on Kessa's behalf, but when he glanced at her, she seemed unsurprised by the reaction. Does it bother you? He asked quietly. The way people look at you. I am used to it, Kessa said. Even among my own clan, people looked at me that way. Too small, too weak, too useless. At least here I have you walking beside me. That is more than I had before. Julian felt that strange tightness in his chest again, the one that appeared whenever Kessa revealed something about her difficult past. Well, they will have to get used to seeing us together, he said firmly. You are my wife, by law if nothing else. They will treat you with respect or they will answer to me. Kessa looked up at him with wide eyes. You would defend me. Against your own people. You are my people now too, Julian said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. They had only known each other for a day, but something about Kessa's quiet strength and vulnerability had already worked its way past his defenses. They ate lunch in the cottage, and Julian told Kessa stories about his work, about the various pieces of furniture he had built, and the sometimes strange requests he received. Kessa laughed at his description of the time he had been asked to build a chair for a man who insisted it needed 7 legs for good luck. The sound of her laughter was like bells, bright and unexpected. Over the following days, a routine developed. Julian would work in his workshop, and Kessa would accompany him, helping where she could and learning about carpentry. She proved to have a good eye for detail and steady hands, and Julian found himself teaching her simple tasks like sanding and oiling wood. In the evenings, they would share meals and talk, slowly learning about each other's lives. Julian discovered that Kessa was well-read, having learned from books stolen or traded from human settlements. She loved stories, especially tales of adventure and romance, though she admitted with embarrassment that she had never thought such things would be part of her own life. Julian told her about growing up in Millbrook, about his family, about the simple pleasures of working with his hands to create something useful and beautiful. The sleeping arrangement remained the same. Kessa in the bed, Julian on the floor. Despite Kessa's continued protests, Julian refused to change it. He told himself it was about being honorable, about respecting her autonomy, but truthfully, he was also afraid. Afraid of what it would mean if they became too close, if this arrangement based on legal necessity became something real. 2 weeks after Kessa's arrival, the baker stopped by to collect his finished chest. He looked nervous when he saw Kessa standing in the workshop, but Julian introduced her firmly as his wife. The baker paid for the chest and left quickly, avoiding eye contact with Kessa. He seemed frightened, Kessa observed after he had gone. Some people are fools, Julian said curtly. He was frustrated by the continued prejudice his neighbors displayed, even as they slowly began to accept the reality of the new law. You are kinder and gentler than half the people in this village. If they cannot see that, it is their loss. Kessa touched his arm, a brief, tentative gesture. Thank you for saying that, but I understand their fear. My people and yours have been enemies for generations. Trust cannot be built in a fortnight. Perhaps not, Julian admitted, but they could at least try to be civil. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Kessa was quieter than usual. Julian noticed her staring into the flames, her expression distant. What are you thinking about? He asked. Kessa was silent for a long moment. I am thinking that I did not expect this, she said finally. When they told me I was being sent away to marry a human, I thought my life was over. I thought I would be chained to someone who hated me, who would use me as a servant or worse. I never imagined I would find someone who would treat me with kindness. Julian set down the piece of wood he had been whittling. I did not expect this either, he admitted. I thought I would resent whoever they assigned to me, but you are easy to be around, Kessa. You are thoughtful and intelligent and good company. I find myself looking forward to our conversations. Kessa turned to look at him, and in the firelight her golden eyes seemed to glow. I look forward to them as well, she said softly. You make me feel as though I matter. As though I am not just a disappointment or a burden. You could never be a burden, Julian said with conviction. You have brought light into a home that had been dark for too long. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Julian felt something shift between them, something unnamed but powerful. Then Kessa looked away, a flush coloring her cheeks, and the moment passed. But that night, as Julian lay on his pallet by the fire, he found himself thinking about the way Kessa smiled when he made her laugh, the careful way she held the tools he gave her, the quiet strength she showed in the face of the villagers' hostility. He thought about how natural it had become to have her in his home, in his workshop, in his life. He thought about how, despite the strange circumstances that had brought them together, he was beginning to care for her. The realization should have frightened him, but instead, it felt like something inevitable, like a river finding its path to the sea. Spring was beginning to give way to summer when Julian realized they would need to formalize their marriage properly. The law required a ceremony witnessed by at least 2 villagers and recorded in the local registry within 30 days of assignment. They were approaching that deadline, and Julian had been putting it off, unsure how to broach the subject with Kessa. Finally, over breakfast one morning, he forced himself to speak. "Kessa, we need to talk about the wedding ceremony." Kessa looked up from her porridge, her expression carefully neutral. "I know, we are running out of time." "I have been thinking," Julian said slowly. "We could keep it simple. Just the 2 of us and the minimum required witnesses. We do not need to make a spectacle of it." "That sounds wise," Kessa agreed. Her voice was calm, but Julian thought he detected a hint of something else beneath it. Disappointment, perhaps. "Unless you would like something more," he added quickly. "If there are orc traditions you want to include, or if you want to invite people, we can do that." Kessa shook her head. "I have no one to invite. My clan made it clear I was no longer welcome among them when they sent me here. And I do not know the orc wedding traditions well enough to perform them properly. I was never expected to marry, you see." The matter-of-fact way she said it made Julian's heart ache. "Then we will do it our way," he said firmly. "We will make our own traditions." Kessa gave him a small smile. "I would like that." They arranged for the ceremony to take place at the end of the week. Julian asked his neighbor, a stonemason named Thomas, and Thomas's wife Margaret to serve as witnesses. Thomas agreed reluctantly, and Margaret looked uncomfortable but said nothing. It was not ideal, but it would fulfill the legal requirement. The day before the wedding, Julian walked into town to speak with the village clerk about recording the marriage. While he was there, he stopped at the general store and purchased a few items: a bolt of soft blue fabric, a spool of ribbon, and a small silver hairpin shaped like a crescent moon. They were not expensive things, but he thought Kessa might like them. When he returned home, he found Kessa in the workshop, carefully sanding a small wooden box she had been working on. She had become quite skilled at woodworking over the past few weeks, and Julian had started giving her small projects of her own. She looked up when he entered and her face brightened. "You are back," she said. "I was beginning to worry. I had some errands to run." Julian set down his purchases on the workbench. "I brought you something." Kessa approached cautiously, looking at the parcels with curiosity. "What is it?" "Open them and see." Kessa unwrapped the fabric first, running her fingers over the soft material. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "What is it for?" "I thought you might want to make a new dress," Julian said. "For the wedding. The one you have been wearing is serviceable, but it does not fit you well." Kessa looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You bought this for me, of course. You are going to be my wife. I want you to have nice things." Kessa opened the other parcels, exclaiming softly over the ribbon and the hairpin. "Julian, this is too much. I do not deserve such gifts." "You deserve far more than I can give you," Julian said quietly, "but this is a start." Kessa set the gifts down and, to Julian's surprise, stepped forward and embraced him. It was quick and tentative, her arms barely wrapping around his waist before she pulled back, but it left Julian feeling warm and oddly breathless. "Thank you," Kessa whispered. "No one has ever given me gifts before. No one has ever made me feel special like you do." Julian wanted to tell her that she was special, that she had become important to him in ways he was only beginning to understand, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just smiled and said, "You are welcome." That evening, Kessa worked on cutting and sewing the fabric into a dress. She was a skilled seamstress, her stitches small and even. Julian watched her work, admiring the concentration on her face, the way her small hands moved with confidence through the unfamiliar task of creating something for herself rather than for others. "Where did you learn to sew?" he asked. "My mother taught me," Kessa said without looking up. "She was a seamstress in our clan, making and repairing clothing and tents. I used to sit with her for hours, learning different stitches and patterns. It was one of the few times I felt useful." "You miss her?" Kessa's hands stilled. "Every day," she admitted. "But she died 3 years ago during a harsh winter. She caught a fever and never recovered. After that, I had no one who truly cared about me. My father had died in the war years before, and I had no siblings. I was alone." "You are not alone anymore," Julian said softly. Kessa looked up at him, and the gratitude in her eyes was almost overwhelming. "No," she agreed, "I am not." The wedding day arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Kessa had finished her dress the night before, and when she emerged from behind the privacy screen Julian had set up for her that morning, he caught his breath. The blue fabric complemented her green skin beautifully, and she had styled her hair in a simple braid woven with the ribbon, the silver hairpin holding it in place. She looked nervous and lovely and nothing like the frightened, downtrodden girl who had arrived at his door a month ago. "You look beautiful," Julian said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Kessa ducked her head, that familiar flush darkening her cheeks. "Thank you. You look very handsome as well." Julian had put on his best shirt and trousers, and he had even trimmed his beard and combed his hair. He felt awkward and self-conscious, but Kessa's words made him stand a little straighter. They walked to the village hall where the clerk was waiting, along with Thomas and Margaret. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. The clerk read the required words from a book, and Julian and Kessa each spoke their agreement to the terms of the marriage. They did not have rings to exchange, so Julian had carved 2 matching wooden bands the night before, simple but smooth and well made. When the clerk told Julian he could kiss his bride, Julian hesitated. He and Kessa had not discussed this part. He looked at her questioningly, and she nodded, almost imperceptibly. He leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, feeling the warmth of her skin against his lips. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the clerk said, sounding bored. "May your union be long and prosperous." Thomas and Margaret signed as witnesses, and then it was done. Julian and Kessa were legally married. They walked back to the cottage in silence, both processing what had just happened. When they reached the door, Julian paused. "I know this is not how either of us imagined our wedding day," he said, "but I want you to know that I take these vows seriously. I will do my best to be a good husband to you, Kessa." "And I will do my best to be a good wife to you," Kessa replied. "Though I am not entirely sure what that means." Julian laughed, surprising himself. "Neither do I, truthfully. I suppose we will figure it out together." They spent the rest of the day in quiet celebration. Julian had purchased a small bottle of wine, and they drank it with their dinner. Kessa had made a special meal, using some of the fresh vegetables from the market and a chicken Julian had bought for the occasion. They talked and laughed, and for a few hours, it felt like they were just a normal couple enjoying their wedding day. As the evening wore on and they sat by the fire, Julian found himself thinking about the future. They were married now, truly married, and that changed things. He looked at Kessa, who was sitting in the other chair with her bare feet tucked under her, looking content and relaxed. "Kessa," he said, and she turned to him with a questioning look. "I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you tonight, or any night for that matter. Not until you are ready. This marriage may have started as a legal obligation, but I want whatever happens between us to be because we both choose it." Kessa's expression softened. "Julian, you have been nothing but kind and respectful to me from the moment we met. I trust you. And I want you to know that I am beginning to feel things for you that I never expected to feel." She paused, gathering her courage. "I care about you, deeply." Julian's heart began to race. "I care about you too," he admitted. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. When I look at you, I do not see an orc or an enemy. I just see Kessa. I see someone strong and brave and good, someone who has survived hardships that would have broken a lesser person. I see someone I am honored to call my wife." Kessa stood and crossed to his chair, kneeling before him so their eyes were level. "I was so afraid when I came here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought my life was ending, but instead it feels like it is finally beginning. You make me feel valued and seen and cared for. You have given me a home and a purpose. You have given me hope." Julian reached out and cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. "You have given me those things too," he said. "This cottage was just an empty place before you arrived. Now it is a home. You have brought warmth and joy into my life, Kessa. I am grateful every day that they assigned you to me." Kessa leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "May I kiss you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. A real kiss, not like the one in the ceremony. In answer, Julian leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, both of them unsure and nervous. But then Kessa's arms came up around his neck and Julian pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something genuine and heartfelt. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Julian rested his forehead against Kessa's, his hands still cradling her face. "That was nice," Kessa said, a note of wonder in her voice. Julian laughed softly. "Yes, it was." They stayed like that for a long moment, just holding each other before Kessa pulled back slightly. "I am ready," she said, meeting his eyes steadily. "If you are." Julian understood what she was offering and his heart swelled with affection and desire. "Are you certain?" he asked, needing to be sure. "I am certain," Kessa said. "I want this. I want you." Julian stood and took her hand, leading her toward the bed. What followed was tender and genuine. Two people who had found each other in the strangest of circumstances, choosing to truly become husband and wife. Julian was careful and gentle, mindful of Kessa's smaller stature and her nervousness. Kessa was brave and trusting, giving herself to him completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, both exhausted and content. Julian ran his fingers through Kessa's unbraided hair, marveling at its softness. "No more sleeping on the floor for you," Kessa murmured against his chest. "You belong here with me." Julian kissed the top of her head. "I will not argue with that." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since the law had upended his life, Julian felt truly at peace. The next several weeks passed in a haze of contentment. Julian and Kessa settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked together in the workshop during the day, with Kessa becoming increasingly skilled at carpentry. Julian began letting her handle complete projects on her own, and her work was of such quality that he was able to sell several of her pieces alongside his own. The villagers slowly began to accept Kessa's presence, though some remained hostile. Julian made it clear through both words and actions that anyone who disrespected his wife would not receive his business, and since he was the only carpenter for miles, people learned to keep their opinions to themselves. Kessa bloomed under Julian's care and affection. She smiled more readily, laughed more freely, and carried herself with growing confidence. Julian loved watching her transform from the frightened, downtrodden girl she had been into a woman who knew her own worth. They had been married for nearly 2 months when trouble arrived. It came in the form of a group of orc warriors who rode into town one afternoon, their massive forms and fierce expressions sending villagers scattering. Julian was in his workshop when he heard the commotion. He stepped outside to see what was happening and felt his blood run cold. 5 orc warriors, all of them massive and battle-scarred, sat astride enormous wolves in the center of the village square. They were clearly looking for something or someone. "Where is the small one?" the lead warrior bellowed, his voice echoing off the buildings. "Where is Kessa?" Julian's protective instincts flared immediately. He stepped forward, making himself visible. "What do you want with Kessa?" he called out. The orc warrior's eyes fixed on him, and Julian had to fight the urge to step back. Up close, the warrior was even more intimidating, easily 7 feet tall with bulging muscles and tusks like daggers. "I am Gornak, war chief of the Iron Skull clan," the warrior announced. "Kessa is of my blood, my niece. I have come to take her back." Julian felt Kessa emerge from the workshop behind him. She gasped when she saw the warriors, and Julian reached back to take her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "Uncle Gornak," Kessa said, her voice steady despite the fear Julian could feel in her trembling hand. "Why have you come?" Gornak dismounted from his wolf and approached them, his expression grim. "I have come because I was wrong to send you away, Kessa. I thought I was doing what was best for the clan, but I have realized my mistake. You belong with your people, not with these weak humans. Come home." Kessa stepped forward, moving to stand beside Julian rather than behind him. "This is my home now," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I am married to Julian. He is my husband, and I will not leave him." Gornak's eyes narrowed. "You would choose a human over your own blood, over your own clan." "You cast me out," Kessa said, anger creeping into her tone. "You told me I was useless, that I brought shame to the clan because I was too small and weak to be a proper orc. You sent me away without a second thought, and now you want me back. Why? What has changed?" Gornak looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "The clan needs you," he said finally. "We have lost many in recent skirmishes with rival clans. We need every member who can contribute, even in small ways. And I have realized that strength is not the only valuable trait. We need your other skills, your intelligence, your healing knowledge." "No," Kessa said flatly. "You had your chance to value me, uncle. You threw it away. I will not come back just because it is now convenient for you." Gornak's expression darkened. "You would defy your war chief, your own blood." "I would defend my wife," Julian interjected, his voice hard. "Kessa has made her choice clear. She is staying here with me." Gornak turned his full attention to Julian, and the weight of his gaze was like a physical force. "You are brave for a human, I will give you that, or perhaps just foolish. Do you truly think you can protect her if I decide to take her by force?" Julian met the warrior's eyes without flinching, even though his heart was pounding. "I will die trying," he said simply. "Kessa is my wife. I will not let you take her." For a long moment, the tension in the square was suffocating. The other orc warriors had dismounted and were watching the confrontation with interest. Villagers peeked out from windows and doorways, too frightened to intervene but too curious to hide completely. Then, unexpectedly, Gornak threw back his head and laughed. It was a booming sound that echoed off the buildings. "You have spirit, little human," he said, still chuckling. "And you clearly care for my niece. Perhaps I was wrong about you as well." Kessa looked as surprised as Julian felt. "What are you saying, uncle?" Gornak sobered, looking at Kessa with something almost like regret. "I am saying that I was wrong to cast you out, Kessa. I let the clan's prejudices blind me to your value. You were always clever, always resourceful, always kind. Those are strengths too, just not the kind our people have traditionally valued. He sighed heavily. And I can see now that you have found someone who does value you, who treats you as you deserve to be treated. I will not take that from you. Kessa's eyes filled with tears. You mean it? You will leave me in peace. I mean it, Gornak confirmed. But know that if you ever wish to return or even just to visit, you will be welcome. I will make sure of it. You are still of the Iron Skull clan, Kessa, no matter where you choose to live. Kessa wiped at her tears, nodding. Thank you, Uncle. That means more than you know. Gornak looked at Julian again, his expression serious. Take care of her, human. She is small, but she is mighty in her own way. She deserves someone who sees that. I do see it, Julian said. Every day. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows how valued she is. Gornak nodded, apparently satisfied. He remounted his wolf and gestured for his warriors to do the same. We will leave you in peace, he announced. But remember, Kessa, you have family who cares about you. Do not be a stranger. With that, the orc warriors rode out of town as quickly as they had arrived, leaving Julian and Kessa standing in the square, still holding hands. For a moment, they just stood there, processing what had happened. Then Kessa turned to Julian and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Thank you, she said, her voice muffled. Thank you for standing up for me. Thank you for choosing me. Julian held her close, relief flooding through him. Always, he promised. I will always choose you, Kessa. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, while the villagers slowly emerged from their hiding places and life in Millbrook gradually returned to normal. Summer passed into autumn, and Julian and Kessa's life together grew richer and deeper. The confrontation with Gornak had changed something in Kessa. She stood taller now, spoke more confidently, and no longer flinched when villagers looked at her. She had faced down her past and chosen her future, and that knowledge gave her a new kind of strength. The villagers, too, began to change their attitudes. Seeing Julian defend Kessa so fiercely had made them reconsider their prejudices. It helped that Kessa was genuinely kind to everyone she met, always ready with a smile or a helping hand. Slowly, grudgingly, the people of Millbrook began to accept her as one of their own. Margaret, Thomas's wife, was the first to reach out in genuine friendship. She stopped by the cottage one afternoon with a basket of apples from her tree. I wanted to apologize, she said to Kessa, looking uncomfortable but determined. I have not been welcoming to you, and that was wrong. You are a good person and you make Julian happy. That is what matters. Kessa accepted the apology graciously, and soon she and Margaret were meeting regularly for tea. Other women in the village followed Margaret's lead, and before long, Kessa had a small circle of friends. Julian watched these developments with quiet pride. His wife was flourishing, and it filled him with joy to see it. One crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Kessa turned to Julian with a nervous expression. I need to tell you something, she said. Julian set down the piece of wood he was carving, immediately attentive. What is it? Is something wrong? No, nothing is wrong, Kessa said quickly. In fact, something is very right. I just do not know how you will feel about it. Julian took her hand, concern and curiosity mingling. You can tell me anything, Kessa, you know that. Kessa took a deep breath. I am with child, she said. We are going to have a baby. Julian stared at her for a moment, the words not quite registering. Then all at once the meaning hit him and joy exploded through his chest. Truly, he asked, his voice cracking slightly. We are going to be parents. Kessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. Truly. I am about 2 months along, I think. Are you happy? Instead of answering, Julian pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. When he finally pulled back, he was grinning so widely his face hurt. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Kessa, this is wonderful news. Amazing news. The best news I could possibly imagine." Kessa laughed through her tears, relief evident on her face. "I was afraid you might be upset. I know we did not plan for this so soon." "We did not plan for any of this," Julian pointed out. "But I would not change a single thing about our life together. And now we get to bring a new life into it. A child who is part of you and part of me. How could I be anything but thrilled?" They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, making plans and dreaming about what their child might be like. Would they have a son or a daughter? Would the baby have more orc traits or more human traits? Would they be healthy and strong? "As long as they are loved, the rest does not matter," Julian said firmly. "We will love this child with everything we have, no matter what." "Yes," Kessa agreed, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "They will never doubt that they are wanted and valued. We will make sure of it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Kessa had occasional bouts of morning sickness, but overall, she remained healthy and active. Julian was protective to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if she was overdoing it. Kessa tolerated his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from a place of love. As winter approached, Julian began working on a cradle. He chose the finest wood he had, a piece of cherry that had been aging in his workshop for years, waiting for the right project. He spent hours carving intricate designs into the headboard, leaves and vines interwoven with geometric patterns. Kessa watched him work, her eyes soft with emotion. "It is beautiful," she said. "Our baby is very lucky to have such a talented father." "And such a strong, brave mother," Julian replied. "I think our child is going to be remarkable, just like you." Kessa blushed, but she smiled, accepting the compliment without self-deprecation. She had grown so much in the past months, learning to see herself through Julian's eyes, to recognize her own worth. Winter arrived with heavy snows, and Kessa's belly grew round with their child. The baby was active, kicking frequently, and Julian loved to place his hand on Kessa's stomach and feel the movements. Each kick felt like a miracle, a tangible reminder of the life they had created together. "I think they are going to be a fighter," Kessa said one evening after a particularly vigorous series of kicks. "They certainly seem energetic." "They take after their mother," Julian teased, "fierce and determined." "Or after their father," Kessa countered, "stubborn and protective." They laughed together, comfortable and happy in their shared anticipation. The baby came on a cold February night. Kessa's labor began in the evening, and Margaret came to help, along with the village midwife. Julian paced anxiously in the workshop, banished from the cottage by the women who insisted his nervous energy was not helpful. The hours passed slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, Margaret emerged from the cottage, her face tired but smiling. "You have a daughter," she announced. "Both mother and baby are doing well. You can come in now." Julian practically ran into the cottage. Kessa was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Julian approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Meet your daughter," Kessa said softly, shifting the baby so Julian could see. Julian looked down at his child for the first time and felt his heart expand in his chest. She was perfect. Tiny and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and skin that was a light green, somewhere between Kessa's shade and normal human tones. Her ears had slight points, and when she yawned, he could see the tiniest bumps where tusks might eventually grow. "She is beautiful," Julian whispered, reaching out to gently touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb, and he felt tears prick his eyes. Absolutely beautiful. Would you like to hold her? Kessa asked. Julian nodded, not trusting his voice. Kessa carefully transferred the baby into his arms, and Julian held his daughter for the first time. She was so light, so fragile, and yet he could already sense the strength in her, the potential for greatness. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I am your father, and I am going to spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved you are." The baby made a small noise, and Kessa laughed softly. "I think she recognizes your voice. You talked to her often enough while she was in my belly." Julian looked up at Kessa, his eyes shining. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for being brave enough to build this life with me." "Thank you for giving me a reason to be brave," Kessa replied. "Thank you for showing me that I was worth loving." They sat together for a long time, the three of them, as the winter sun rose higher in the sky. Margaret and the midwife had left, promising to return later with food and supplies. For now they were alone, a family united by law and choice and love. "What should we name her?" Julian asked eventually. Kessa considered the question. "I have always liked the name Lily," she said. "It is a human name, but it is pretty, and lilies are strong flowers that bloom even in difficult conditions. It seems fitting." "Lily," Julian repeated, testing the name. "Lily Yates, I love it." So their daughter became Lily, and she brought joy and chaos into their lives in equal measure. She was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and slept relatively well. As the months passed, it became clear that she had inherited traits from both her parents. She had Julian's brown eyes and Kessa's pointed ears. Her skin remained that soft green shade, and her tiny tusks did eventually come in, small and delicate like her mother's. The villagers were initially uncertain about Lily, but just as they had come to accept Kessa, they grew to love the baby. Children especially were fascinated by her, crowding around whenever Kessa brought her to the market. Lily seemed to enjoy the attention, gurgling and smiling at anyone who spoke to her. Gornak visited once, bringing gifts for his great-niece: a tiny leather vest, a carved wooden toy, and a promise of protection. He held Lily with surprising gentleness for such a fearsome warrior, and Julian saw tears in the orc's eyes as he looked at the baby. "She is a bridge between our peoples," Gornak said quietly. "A symbol of what can be when we choose understanding over hatred. Raise her well, Julian. Raise her to be proud of both her heritages." "We will," Julian promised. "She will know where she comes from, both the human and the orc. And she will know that she is loved." Spring came again, bringing with it new life and new beginnings. Julian's carpentry business was thriving, and Kessa had become an equal partner in the work. Together they built furniture that was both beautiful and functional, and their reputation spread beyond Millbrook. People came from neighboring villages to commission pieces from the husband and wife team. On a warm May afternoon, Julian and Kessa sat on the porch of their cottage, watching Lily play in the grass. She was nearly a year old now, starting to take her first tentative steps. Her laughter filled the air as she chased a butterfly, stumbling but always getting back up. "Can you believe it has been almost 2 years since we met?" Kessa asked, leaning against Julian's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like we have been together forever," Julian said. "Other times it feels like it all happened yesterday." "I was so afraid that day," Kessa admitted. "So certain that my life was over. I could never have imagined it would turn out like this." Julian wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "The law said every man must wed an orc," he said, "and they assigned me the smallest one of all. I thought it was a curse at the time, but it turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life." Kessa tilted her face up to his, her golden eyes warm. "You are the greatest blessing of mine," she said. "You taught me that I was worth loving. You gave me a home and a family and a future. You gave me everything I never dared to hope for." Julian kissed her, soft and sweet, as their daughter played nearby and the spring breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you, Kessa Yates," Julian said. "I love you too, Julian Yates," Kessa replied. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching Lily explore her world with fearless curiosity. She was growing up in a place where she was accepted for exactly who she was, surrounded by love and support. She would never know the prejudice and rejection her mother had faced, the feeling of being unwanted or insufficient. "She is going to be remarkable," Julian said, voicing the thought that had been running through his mind since Lily's birth. "Just like her parents," Kessa said with a smile. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Julian felt a profound sense of contentment. His life had not turned out the way he had planned or expected. The law that had forced him into marriage had seemed like a punishment at first, an intrusion by an uncaring government into the lives of ordinary people. But that law had brought him Kessa, and Kessa had brought him joy and love and purpose. She had transformed his lonely cottage into a warm home. She had given him a daughter who was the light of his life. She had shown him that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. The prejudices that had once divided humans and orcs were slowly breaking down, one marriage and one mixed family at a time. Julian and Kessa were part of that change, living proof that love could bridge any divide if people were willing to open their hearts. Lily toddled over to them, her little arms raised, wanting to be picked up. Julian scooped her up, and she settled between her parents, yawning sleepily. Kessa stroked their daughter's hair, humming a lullaby she had learned from her own mother years ago. "We should go inside," Kessa said softly. "It is getting late, and someone needs her bed." Julian stood carefully, still holding Lily, and offered his hand to Kessa. She took it, and together they walked into their cottage, into the warm glow of the firelight and the comfort of home. As Julian laid Lily in the cradle he had made for her, watching her eyes drift closed, he thought about the future. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. The world was still learning to accept human-orc unions, and Lily would face obstacles because of her mixed heritage. But she would also have advantages. Two parents who loved her fiercely, a community that was learning to embrace difference, and the strength and resilience inherited from both her bloodlines. "What are you thinking?" Kessa asked, coming to stand beside him. "I am thinking that we are very fortunate," Julian said. "Against all odds we found each other. We built something beautiful from a situation neither of us wanted. We created a family." Kessa slipped her hand into his, intertwining their fingers. "We did," she agreed. "And we will keep building it day by day for the rest of our lives." Julian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "For the rest of our lives," he echoed. They stood together in the quiet cottage, listening to their daughter's soft breathing, and Julian knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The law had changed his life, but love had transformed it. And he would be grateful for that, every single day, for as long as he lived. Years passed in a gentle, contented rhythm. Lily grew from a toddler into a bright, curious child who loved helping in the workshop and playing in the meadow behind the cottage. When she was 5, Kessa gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Jacob and Iris. The twins had more human features than Lily, but they still carried traces of their orc heritage in their strength and their slightly pointed ears. Julian's cottage, once built for a solitary man, expanded to accommodate the growing family. Julian and Kessa worked together to add 2 more rooms, and the sound of children's laughter filled spaces that had once been silent and empty. The village of Millbrook changed too. As more human orc marriages produced children, the community had to adapt. A small school opened, taught by a kind woman who treated all children equally regardless of their heritage. The market expanded to include goods from orc settlements, and trade between the two peoples flourished. Julian and Kessa became respected members of the community, known for their skilled craftsmanship and their warm hospitality. Their home was always open to neighbors who needed help, and they raised their children to be kind, fair, and proud of who they were. Gornak visited regularly, bringing gifts and stories from the orc clans. He had become an advocate for peace and integration, using his position as war chief to encourage understanding between species. He took great pride in his great-niece and great-nephews, teaching them orc traditions and ensuring they knew their heritage. On a summer evening when Lily was 10 and the twins were 5, the family gathered around the dinner table. It had become their favorite time of day, when everyone shared stories about what they had done and what they had learned. "Mama," Lily said, "Emma at school asked me today why I look different from other kids. She was not mean about it, just curious." Kessa glanced at Julian and he gave her an encouraging nod. They had known this conversation would come eventually. "What did you tell her?" Kessa asked. "I told her that I am part human and part orc," Lily said. "I told her that my parents come from different peoples, but they love each other very much, and that makes me special, not different in a bad way." Julian felt pride swell in his chest. "That was a perfect answer," he said. "You should be proud of who you are, Lily. Both parts of your heritage make you strong and unique." "I am proud," Lily said. "Emma thought it was interesting. She wants to meet Uncle Gornak the next time he visits." They all laughed, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But later that night, after the children were in bed, Julian and Kessa sat together by the fire, reflecting on how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Julian asked. "Staying here with me instead of returning to your clan?" Kessa looked at him in surprise. "Never," she said emphatically. "Not for a single moment. This is where I belong with you and our children. This is the life I was meant to have." "I am glad," Julian said, "because I cannot imagine my life without you. You made me whole in ways I did not even know I was broken." Kessa leaned her head on his shoulder. "We made each other whole," she said. "That is what love does. It fills the empty spaces and heals the hidden wounds." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth, thinking about the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. A law meant to force peace had given them something far more valuable. A love that transcended difference, a family that bridged two worlds, and a future full of hope. Julian thought back to that day 2 years into their marriage, when he had stood in the village square and told Gornak that he would die defending Kessa. He had meant it then, and he meant it still. She was his wife, his partner, his best friend. She was the mother of his children and the keeper of his heart, and she had been assigned to him because she was the smallest orc of all, deemed useless by her own clan. The thought made Julian smile. They had been so wrong about her. Kessa was mighty in all the ways that truly mattered, in spirit, in kindness, in resilience, in love. "What are you smiling about?" Kessa asked, noticing his expression. "I am just thinking about how lucky I am," Julian said. "The law said every man must wed an orc, and they assigned me you. The smallest, the one nobody wanted, and you turned out to be the greatest treasure I could ever have found." Kessa's eyes grew misty. "You always know exactly what to say to make me feel loved," she said. "That is because you are loved," Julian replied, "more than I can ever adequately express. You and our children are my entire world." They kissed, a sweet affirmation of the bond they had built over years of shared joys and challenges. When they finally retired to bed, they lay close together, Kessa's head on Julian's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. "Julian." Kessa murmured sleepily. "Yes. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked through me. Thank you for choosing me every day." "Thank you for letting me," Julian replied. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart." They drifted off to sleep, secure in their love and in the life they had built together. Outside, the moon rose over Millbrook, casting silver light over the peaceful village where humans and orcs were learning to live side by side, one family at a time. The law that had once seemed so unjust had become the foundation for a new world, one where love mattered more than species, where understanding replaced fear, and where two people who should have been enemies became the very best of partners. And in a small cottage at the edge of the village, Julian and Kessa Yates slept peacefully, their children safe in nearby rooms, their hearts full of gratitude for the unexpected blessings that had come from a law that had forced them together, and a love that had chosen to stay. The years continued to unfold with a grace that Julian had never anticipated. Lily grew into a remarkable young woman, skilled in carpentry and confident in her dual heritage. She became a voice for other mixed-heritage children in the region, advocating for acceptance and understanding. The twins, Jacob and Iris, followed in their sister's footsteps, each developing their own unique talents and personalities. Julian's hair began to gray at the temples, and Kessa developed laugh lines around her eyes from years of joy and contentment. They worked side by side in the workshop that had expanded yet again, creating furniture that was sought after across the province. Their partnership, forged in uncertainty and strengthened by love, became the foundation of everything they built, both literally and figuratively. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Julian surprised Kessa with a gift he had been working on in secret for months. It was a wooden jewelry box made from the same cherry wood he had used for Lily's cradle, inlaid with intricate designs of leaves and flowers. "Open it," Julian urged as Kessa ran her fingers over the smooth surface. Inside was a necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in the city. A silver pendant shaped like two hands clasping, one clearly human and one clearly orc, joined together in unity. "It is beautiful," Kessa breathed, tears gathering in her eyes. "Julian, this is too much." "It is not enough," Julian countered, fastening the necklace around her neck. 20 years, Kessa. 20 years of waking up beside you, of building this life with you, of watching our children grow. You have given me more happiness than I ever thought possible. A necklace hardly seems adequate." Kessa touched the pendant, feeling the weight of it against her chest. "Do you remember how afraid we both were that first day?" "I remember thinking you were the smallest orc I had ever seen," Julian said with a smile. "I remember wondering how we would possibly make this work. I remember thinking you would hate me," Kessa admitted, "that I would spend the rest of my life serving someone who saw me as a burden." Julian pulled her into his arms. "Instead, you spent it with someone who sees you as a blessing," he said. "The law brought us together, but love kept us together, and I would choose you again, Kessa, every single time." "And I would choose you," Kessa replied, kissing him softly. Their children, now grown, had organized a celebration for their anniversary. The entire village turned out, humans and orcs alike, many of them products of the same law that had united Julian and Kessa. There was food and music and dancing, and Julian watched with pride as his children moved through the crowd, comfortable and confident in who they were. Gornak was there too, older now but still formidable. He approached Julian during the celebration, clasping his arm in the traditional orc greeting that Julian had learned over the years. "You have done well, human," Gornak said. "You kept your promise. You raised Kessa's children to be proud of both their heritages. You built a good life." We built a good life, Julian corrected. Kessa and I together, I could not have done any of it without her. Gornak nodded approvingly. That is the mark of a true partnership. You see each other as equals, as complements. My niece chose wisely when she chose to stay with you. As the celebration continued into the evening, Julian found a quiet moment to stand apart and observe. He watched Kessa laughing with Margaret, who had become one of her closest friends. He watched Lily dancing with a young man from a neighboring village, her green skin glowing in the firelight. He watched Jacob and Iris playing with other children, no distinction made between human, orc, or mixed heritage. This was the world they had helped create, one family at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one choice for love over hatred at a time. The law had been the catalyst, but the people had done the real work, opening their hearts and their minds to new possibilities. You look contemplative, Kessa said, coming to stand beside him. Julian wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. I am just thinking about how far we have come. Not just us, but everyone. Look at this celebration, Kessa. Humans and orcs together, celebrating a marriage between species that would have been unthinkable 30 years ago. We were part of making that happen, Kessa said. By refusing to let prejudice dictate our lives, by loving each other openly and raising our children with pride, we help change minds. You helped change my mind, Julian said. I did not realize how many assumptions I had about orcs until I met you. You showed me that strength comes in many forms, that courage is not about physical power, and that the size of someone's heart matters more than the size of their tusks. Kessa laughed, the sound musical and bright. You have certainly gotten better at orc compliments over the years. I have had a good teacher, Julian replied, kissing the top of her head. As the moon rose high in the sky and the celebration began to wind down, Julian and Kessa walked home hand in hand, their children following behind. The cottage that had once housed only Julian's loneliness was now filled with love and laughter, a testament to the power of choosing hope over fear, understanding over prejudice, and love above all else. That night, lying in bed with Kessa in his arms, Julian reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. The law that had seemed like such an intrusion, such an injustice, had given him everything that mattered most. It had given him Kessa, his greatest love and his truest partner. It had given him children who would carry forward the legacy of integration and acceptance. It had given him a purpose and a community and a future worth living. Julian, Kessa's sleepy voice broke through his thoughts. Yes, my love, I am glad they assigned me to you. I am glad I was the smallest one of all, because it brought me here to you, to this life. Julian tightened his embrace. I am glad too, so very glad. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Kessa Yates. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Julian Yates. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the love they had built and the life they continued to share. Outside, the world kept turning, moving forward into a future where the barriers between species grew smaller with each passing generation, where children like Lily, Jacob, and Iris could grow up without the fear and hatred their parents had known. And it had all started with a law that forced men to wed orcs, and two people who had turned an obligation into the greatest love story of their lives. The smallest orc had brought the biggest changes, not through physical strength, but through the quiet power of her spirit, her kindness, and her courage to open her heart to someone from a different world. In the end, that was the real magic. Not the law that brought them together, but the love they chose to build day after day, year after year, until it became the foundation of not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. It was a legacy of hope, a testament to the possibility of change, and a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely pairings create the most beautiful outcomes. Julian smiled in his sleep, his hand still resting on Kessa's waist, and dreamed of all the tomorrows they still had to share, all the moments yet to come, all the love still waiting to be given and received. The law had said every man must wed an orc, and they had assigned him the smallest one of all. But in that small package had come the greatest gift of his life, a love that transcended difference, a partnership that made him whole, and a future filled with endless possibility. And that, Julian knew as he drifted deeper into peaceful sleep, was more than enough. It was everything.